What I am about to tell you I have never told anyone, not because I am ashamed of it, but because some stories are too precise to survive being summarized. The night everything fell apart at work was also the night I discovered that the woman I admired most had been carrying a secret that could have destroyed her career. She did not tell me. I found it myself, and what I chose to do with what I found, that decision changed both of our lives forever. Her name was Claire Donovan, and for 18 months she had been the most intimidating person in my professional life. She was 38 VP of Strategy at Meridian Communications, one of Manhattan's most aggressive mid-size PR and branding firms, and she carried herself like someone who had never once needed to raise her voice to make a room go quiet. She did not need to. She would simply look at you with those dark, steady eyes, and you would suddenly feel the urgent need to be more prepared than you currently were. Senior partners revised their presentations after she walked past their offices. Junior associates rewrote entire campaign briefs based on a single comment she had left in a document margin. I had watched two veteran executives actually stammer during board reviews because Claire Donovan tilted her head at a slide they thought was finished. I was a senior account manager, 33 years old, 3 years out of a smaller agency in Chicago where I had learned exactly how brutal this industry could get. I was good at my job. I handled pressure well. I did not stammer. But Claire Donovan made me profoundly aware of every word I said before I said it. And I had spent the better part of a year and a half convincing myself that awareness was purely professional. It was not purely professional. I knew that. I had known it for a long time. But knowing something and doing something about it are two entirely different problems, and when your direct superior is the kind of woman who can dismantle a boardroom argument in 45 seconds. You keep your feelings where they belong, locked somewhere practical and far from anything that could cause damage. The night everything changed started like a reward. Meridian had spent 6 relentless weeks building the Solaris Experience campaign for Solaris Hotels, a luxury chain with $40 million and very strong opinions about brand identity. 6 weeks of 18-hour days, scrapped drafts, impossible revision rounds, and a client who changed the visual direction 3 times before settling on the first concept we had originally pitched. By 9 p.m. Friday, the campaign had officially launched. The team poured into the rooftop event space 2 floors above our offices. Drinks catered food, the particular exhausted euphoria of people who had survived something together. I was standing near the bar with Lauren Hartley, our junior account manager, when my phone fired a Google alert. I looked at the screen. My stomach dropped through the floor. "Lauren," my voice came out flatter than I intended. "Pull up Brandwatch right now." She frowned at me. "We're celebrating. The campaign just launched too." "Lauren." I turned the phone screen toward her. She read the alert. The color left her face in one clean motion like someone had pulled a drain. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." Brandwatch is a real-time social intelligence platform. It monitors every major network simultaneously and tracks public sentiment on a live scale, color-coded from green to red. Green means your audience loves you. Yellow means they have concerns. Red means you have a crisis. Solid red, wall-to-wall, 0 green, 0 yellow means the building is on fire, and someone already called the news before they called the fire department. Lauren's screen loaded. It was entirely, completely, devastatingly red. 7 million views. She breathed, scrolling with a hand that had started shaking. "Marcus, the TikTok has 7 million views. Someone filmed a Solaris manager in Miami asking a black couple to move their pool chairs. They were registered guests. And someone tagged the video with our hashtag, and now it's everywhere. It's a pile-on. People are posting every bad experience they've ever had at a Solaris property and tagging it with our campaign hashtag, and it's Marcus, this is catastrophic." My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my temples. "How long has this been running?" "The TikTok posted at 7:45. The hashtag co-option started around 9:15. We've been up here celebrating for 40 minutes while our campaign was being used as a public complaint board." "How many impressions?" She checked, swallowed. 460,000, and climbing. 460,000 impressions. Every single one of them a wrecking ball aimed at a $40 million account. "Where's Claire?" Lauren pointed. Claire was across the room near the window's charcoal blazer champagne glass she had barely touched, talking to 2 people from the brands division who were both laughing at something she had just said. The Manhattan skyline spread out behind her in 20 miles of cold December light. She looked completely at ease, the way she always looked, like the entire world was operating on a schedule she had reviewed in advance. She saw me cutting toward her before I was halfway across the room. Whatever she read in my face made her set her champagne glass on the nearest surface and say something brief to the two executives, and by the time I reached her, she was already turning fully toward me with her entire attention locked and ready. "Talk," she said. "Solaris is burning," I said. Hashtag co-option TikTok, 460,000 impressions, and every single one of them is a PR catastrophe. Crawford hasn't called yet, but he will inside the next 30 minutes. Something moved fast and sharp behind her eyes. Her jaw set in the particular way that I had learned to recognize as Claire Donovan deciding that a situation did not get to beat her. She turned to Lauren. "Go home," she said. "I'll handle your notification list from here. I can stay and help." "Lauren," Claire's voice was not unkind, but it was absolute. "You have 2 kids at home, and it is 10:30 on a Friday night. Go. I have Marcus." Lauren grabbed her coat and bag and was gone in 90 seconds. And then it was just Claire and me and 400,000 impressions and a campaign that was hemorrhaging in real time. "Conference room," Claire said. "Bring everything you have." I followed her down the hall and felt the weight of what was coming settle across both our shoulders at the exact same moment, shared and specific and somehow steadier for being split between 2 people instead of 1. By midnight, the rest of the floor had gone dark. The catering staff had packed out. The elevators had stopped running their usual busy cycles. The only light on the entire level came from the glass-walled conference room where Claire and I were pulling the campaign apart piece by piece, killing posts, drafting statements, restructuring the public-facing timeline. It was somewhere around 12:45 a.m. when I pulled up the server activity log to cross-reference the campaign file access history standard crisis protocol to establish an accurate internal timeline before anyone started asking questions about what happened when. I found the timestamp immediately. The master campaign strategy document, the full Solaris experience brief, had been accessed, read, and annotated 3 days before the campaign launched. During a security window so narrow that only 3 people at Meridian Communications had the clearance level to open that file. The access log showed one email address. It was Claire's. My hands went completely still on the keyboard. I pulled up the attached correspondence chain, and everything I thought I understood about tonight rebuilt itself into something I was not even close to prepared for. The email chain had 4 messages. I read all of them twice. 3 days before the Solaris Experience campaign launched, Claire had run a full semantic clearance check on the hashtag, a standard linguistic scan that identifies whether a proposed campaign tag carries any existing association slang usage or unintended cultural meaning across different communities. The tool flagged it immediately. Solaris Experience had been used for nearly 2 years in regional travel communities, as ironic shorthand for luxury hotel experiences gone catastrophically wrong. It was not prominent, it was not trending, but it was a lit match sitting inside a room full of expensive furniture, and Claire had found it, documented it in precise detail, and sent a formal recommendation to Derek Shaw, CEO of Meridian Communications, to delay the launch 72 hours and retest with an alternate tag. Derek's reply came 40 minutes later. 11 words. Timeline is locked. Client approved the tag. Move forward as planned. Claire pushed back the following morning. She sent 3 alternate hashtag options, a revised rollout timeline that cost the client exactly 1 week, and the full semantic clearance report as a formal attachment. She copied Meridian's head of risk management. Derek's final reply was 7 words. The decision has been made. Thank you, Claire. I sat back and felt something cold move through my chest. She had known. She had identified exactly how tonight was going to break, built the entire case for stopping it, and been dismissed by a man who wanted to hit his delivery date. Then she had walked into the launch celebration, held her champagne glass, smiled when she needed to smile, and when everything collapsed precisely the way she predicted, she had stayed and started fixing it without breathing a word to anyone. "Claire," I said. She was still typing eyes on her screen. "Give me 60 seconds. Claire." Different tone that time. She heard it. She stopped. Her eyes moved to my screen, read the document title in my browser tab, and her entire face changed, not dramatically, but in the specific way of someone who has been bracing for a moment for 3 days and has finally arrived at it. A long exhale, shoulders dropping half an inch. "How much did you read?" she asked. "Everything." "Then you know." "I know you flagged it," I said, and my voice came out tighter than I intended. "I know you gave Shaw 3 alternate options and he killed it in 7 words. I know you've been in this room for 2 hours fixing a disaster you predicted and tried to prevent, and you haven't said one word about it. It wouldn't have changed what needed doing tonight. Claire. Marcus. Both her palms pressed flat against the conference table, fingers spread wide, the posture of someone physically holding themselves in place. What was I supposed to do, walk in here and announce I told him so while the account was collapsing? That helps no one. You should have told me, I said, because I've been sitting here thinking this was a shared problem. Turns out you've been carrying it alone for 3 days. I leaned forward. That's not nothing. She looked down at her hands. When she spoke, her voice had dropped to something I had never heard from her before, quieter, stripped of its usual precision. I've been doing this for 12 years, she said. Carrying things alone it's how it works. It's how it has always worked. It doesn't have to. She looked up fast, like the sentence landed somewhere unexpected. I'm not going anywhere tonight, I said. The Crawford call the morning board whatever Shaw does when he realizes the documentation exists. I'm here for all of it. The expression that crossed her face was not something I could easily name. It was older and more complicated than gratitude, the look of someone so accustomed to self-sufficiency that a genuine offer of support registers as something close to disorienting. Derek will try to bury that email chain before the board meeting, she said carefully. If he finds out you've seen it, he can find out, I said. I've already saved a copy to a secure external drive. Under New York corporate law, internal company communications are classified as official business records. No single executive can delete or suppress them without full board authorization. If Shaw tries to make that chain disappear, he stops being a CEO managing a PR crisis and starts being an executive with a legal problem. Her eyes sharpened. You know corporate records law. I know enough to make sure those emails exist tomorrow morning. She stared at me across the table with an expression I could not fully read, searching and intense, and something underneath it that made my pulse climb in a way I had no business allowing at 1 a.m. in a crisis situation. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Not a quick touch, not a professional gesture. Her hand covered mine, fully warm and deliberate, and she held it there without tightening her fingers. Just the steady, certain weight of it resting on top of my hand like she had made a specific decision and was not taking it back. My heart slammed so hard I was certain she could feel it through my skin. Thank you, she said. 2 words, quiet and direct, with every layer of professional distance completely gone. Don't thank me yet, I managed. We still have a $40 million account to save before sunrise. The smallest beginning of a real smile crossed her face. She did not move her hand right away. 2 seconds passed. 3. And in that narrow window with her hand warm over mine and the city burning cold and bright beyond the glass, I understood with complete certainty that whatever existed between us had moved past the point where either of us could pretend otherwise. Then her phone lit up on the table. Unknown number. 2:07 a.m. She pulled her hand back, looked at the screen. Something immediate and specific shifted in her expression, and she stood pressed accept and walked into the darkened hallway without a word. Through the glass wall, I watched her standing with the phone against her ear. Her back was to me, but I could see her free hand fingers curling slowly, tightly into her palm, and I knew with absolute certainty that whoever was calling at 2 a.m. had nothing to do with Solaris Hotels. She was gone for 6 minutes. I counted because I had nothing else to do with my hands while I watched her through the glass wall, standing in the dark hallway with her back straight and her free hand pressed flat against the wall beside her like she needed something solid to push against. At minute 3, she turned slightly to the side, and I caught her profile, jaw-tight chin up, the particular posture of someone refusing to let their face do what it wants to do. When she came back in, she set her phone face down on the table, pulled her chair out, and sat. She picked up where she had left off on the keyboard. Her fingers moved, but the rhythm was wrong, too deliberate, too controlled, the way someone types when they are concentrating on not shaking instead of on what they are actually writing. Claire, I said. I'm fine. Fast. Flat. The 2 words of someone who is absolutely not fine and knows you know it. I didn't ask. She stopped typing. Her hand stayed on the keyboard but went still. Marcus, we have a statement to finish and a board meeting in 4 hours. The statement is finished, I said. I sent it to Crawford 8 minutes ago. He confirmed receipt. I stood up, crossed to the small kitchen station in the corner of the conference room, and poured 2 mugs of coffee from the pot that had been sitting there since midnight. I carried both back set one in front of her and sat down not across the table this time, but in the chair directly beside her. She looked at the mug. Her throat moved. "His new wife had the baby tonight," she said. Her voice came out completely level, completely controlled. "A boy. Ryan called because he wanted me to hear it from him before it went on social media." A pause. "He said he thought I deserved that courtesy." I watched her face. "That's not courtesy," I said. "That's a man who wanted a reaction and dressed it up as consideration." Something cracked behind her eyes, fast and sharp like a fault line giving way. Her jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle working beneath her cheekbone. "We were together for 4 years," she said. "Engaged for 2, and the reason he gave me when he ended it—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "He told me I was too focused on my career to be a real partner, that he needed someone who would actually show up." Her voice dropped to something rougher. "And now he calls me at 2 in the morning to tell me he has a son, and somewhere in that phone call I'm supposed to understand that he was right, that everything he said was right." "He wasn't right," I said. "Marcus." "Claire." I turned in my chair to face her directly. "He wasn't right. A man who ends a 4-year relationship and then calls his ex at 2 in the morning to announce his newborn son is not a man who moved on. He's a man who still needs to win." I held her gaze without blinking. "You are not the evidence of his good judgment. You never were." Her breath caught. It was the smallest sound, barely audible, but in the silence of the empty office it was enormous. She turned her face away fast, chin-lifting eyes going to the ceiling for a moment in the specific way of someone fighting hard against their own tear ducts. "I am not going to cry in front of you," she said, and her voice cracked clean down the middle on the last word. "That's fine," I said. "You don't have to do anything in front of me. I don't cry at work." She pressed 2 fingers against the inside corner of her eye. "I have never cried at work, not once in 12 years. "This isn't really work anymore," I said. "It's 2 a.m. and the caterers went home 3 hours ago and you just got a phone call designed to make you feel like your entire career was a mistake." I leaned forward slightly. "I think the 12-year streak can take the night off." A sound came out of her that was halfway between a laugh and something that hurt short and involuntary, like it escaped before she could catch it. Her shoulders dropped. The rigid line of her back softened by a single degree, and then her eyes went genuinely wet and she pressed her fingers harder against them, and her breath came in one uneven pull that she tried to disguise as a sigh, and did not entirely succeed. "I hate this," she said thickly. "I hate that he still has the ability to—" She stopped, reset. "I built something real here. I built something that matters, and one phone call and I'm sitting in a conference room at 2 in the morning feeling like I made every wrong choice." "You made choices that made you exceptional," I said. "He made choices that made him someone who calls his ex-fiancée from the maternity ward." She made that sound again, the broken laugh. This time it lasted a full second longer. She dropped her hand from her face and looked at me with wet eyes and an expression that was exhausted and raw and more real than anything I had seen from her in 18 months. "You're very good at this," she said quietly. "At what? Making people feel like the version of themselves they forgot they were." My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the crisis outside this room. She reached for the coffee mug. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted it visible enough that she noticed me noticing, and her jaw tightened with fresh embarrassment. "Hey." I reached over and covered her hand with mine on the mug, steadying it. "I've got it." She let me. Her hand relaxed under mine and she exhaled slowly, and for a moment she simply let someone else carry the weight of one small thing. I kept my hand there until the mug was steady and her breathing had evened out. Then I moved my chair 2 inches closer, close enough that my shoulder pressed lightly against hers, and I stayed there present and warm and deliberate while the city hummed its indifferent 2 a.m. hum beyond the glass. She did not move away. "Thank you," she said very quietly. 3rd time tonight she had said it. Each time it had cost her something different to get the words out. "The board meeting is at 6, I said. "We have time. Tell me what you need right now." She looked at me from the corner of her eye. "Right now?" A long breath. "Right now I just need this to feel survivable." "It is," I said. "All of it." She nodded. Once, tight and small, turned back to her screen. 30 seconds later, my laptop pinged with a security notification from Meridian's building management system, a camera alert from the underground parking garage triggered by a keycard access at 2:41 a.m. I pulled up the alert and felt the warmth in the room drop several degrees. The keycard belonged to Derek Shaw. Claire. I turned my laptop screen toward her. She read the security alert in 2 seconds flat. Every trace of vulnerability that had existed in her face 60 seconds ago was gone, replaced by something sharp and cold and extremely focused. She straightened in her chair, and the transformation was so fast and so complete that it almost took my breath away. "He doesn't come in at 2 a.m. for nothing," she said. "No," I agreed. "He doesn't." She was already pulling up files. "He knows the board meeting is at 6. If he's here now, he's here to get ahead of something." Her fingers moved fast across the keyboard. "He'll go to his office first, pull his own copies of whatever documentation he thinks is relevant. Then he'll start making calls." She glanced at me. "How secure is your external drive copy of the email chain?" "Personal device, personal cloud backup, password protected," I said. "He can't touch it." "Good," she exhaled. "Because the moment he realizes that chain exists and that someone other than him has seen it, he will do one of two things. He will either get ahead of it at the board meeting and frame it as a leadership decision with documented risk acceptance, which is defensible but embarrassing, or he will attempt to discredit whoever surfaced it." I looked at her steadily. "Meaning me?" "Meaning you." She met my eyes without flinching. "Marcus, I need you to understand what you're walking into here. Derek Shaw has been CEO of this company for 9 years. He has allies on that board. If he decides to make you the problem instead of the email chain, then he decides that I said. I'm not interested in protecting my position at the cost of yours." She stared at me. Her jaw worked once like she had started to say something and reconsidered it. "You should be," she finally said, her voice rougher than she intended. "You should absolutely be interested in protecting your position. I'm more interested in making sure the right story gets told tomorrow morning." I leaned forward. "You flagged the risk. You built the case. You were overruled by someone who prioritized a delivery date over a semantic clearance report. That is the story. Everything else is noise." Her throat moved. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," I said. "It's just not easy." She held my gaze for a long moment, long enough that I became acutely aware of how close we were sitting, shoulders nearly touching the space between us narrowed by 3 hours of shared crisis and the particular intimacy of being the only 2 people awake in a building that was supposed to be empty. "Pull the full board presentation deck," she said finally, her voice dropping back into strategy mode. "I want to review every slide that touches the campaign timeline. If Derek tries to revise the narrative tomorrow, I want our version already airtight." "Already open," I said. She looked at my screen and then at me, and something that was almost a smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. "You had that ready before I asked." "I had it ready when the security alert came through." "Marcus." She said my name the way she had been saying it all night, differently from how she said it in meetings, differently from how she said it in the hallway or on calls. More direct, more personal, like it meant something specific in her mouth. "Yeah," I said. "I need to ask you something." "Ask." She turned in her chair to face me more fully. Up close I could see the exhaustion written into the lines around her eyes, the faint smudge where her mascara had not entirely survived the last hour. She looked more real than I had ever seen her, more present. "Why are you still here?" she asked. "And I don't mean tonight. I mean—" She stopped, reframed. "You could have handed me the alert at midnight and gone home with a clean conscience. Nobody would have blamed you. This isn't your crisis to manage." "It became mine when you stayed," I said. She absorbed that. "That's not a sufficient professional reason." "No," I agreed. "It's not." The air between us shifted. I felt it the way you feel a weather change, something atmospheric and significant moving through the room without making a sound. Her eyes stayed on mine, and neither of us looked away. And the moment stretched out longer than it had any professional right to. Then her hand moved. She reached across and picked up my coffee mug from beside my laptop, checked that it was still warm, and pressed it into my hands with both of hers wrapped briefly around mine, deliberate and warm, and gone again before I could react properly. "Drink something," she said quietly. "You've been running on adrenaline for 3 hours." My hands felt the absence of hers the moment she let go. I drank. She turned back to her screen. We worked in the specific silence of two people who have just acknowledged something without naming it and are now very carefully not discussing it. 20 minutes later at 3:02 a.m. my phone rang. Bill Crawford, the client. I pressed accept and put it on speaker between us. Claire straightened instinctively, shoulders back expression calibrated the VP of strategy reassembling herself in real time. Crawford's voice filled the room. He sounded exhausted and deliberate. "I've reviewed your 6 a.m. plan," he said. "The statement is strong. The restructure timeline is credible." A pause that lasted long enough to make the room feel very small. "Meridian still has the account." Claire's eyes closed for exactly 1 second. Her chin dropped forward just slightly in the specific relief of someone who has been holding their breath for 4 hours and has finally been given permission to exhale. Then her office door swung open. Derek Shaw stood in the doorway in a charcoal overcoat, cheeks still flushed from the December cold eyes moving between the two of us with an expression that had nothing warm in it at all. "Interesting," he said. "I wasn't aware anyone else was still in the building." Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. Derek Shaw filled the doorway the way powerful men filled doorways deliberately, like the space belonged to him before he entered it. He was 52, silver-haired, the kind of physically imposing that came from decades of believing every room adjusted to him rather than the other way around. His charcoal overcoat was still buttoned. He had not planned to stay long. "Derek?" Claire's voice was completely steady. "We just got off the phone with Crawford. The account is holding." "I know." He stepped inside, letting the door fall shut behind him. "I spoke with Crawford myself 20 minutes ago." His eyes moved around the room, the open laptops, the coffee mugs, the documentation spread across the conference table, and then settled on me with an expression that was not quite a smile. "I don't believe I've interrupted anything inappropriate." "You interrupted a working session," I said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Marcus Webb, Senior Account Manager." He said my title the way people say things they consider temporary. "I wasn't aware you were part of the Solaris Crisis Response Team." "Claire needed support tonight," I said. "I stayed." "How admirable." He crossed toward the head of the table, unbuttoning his coat with the unhurried ease of a man who had already decided how this conversation ended. "Well, since you're both here, we can align on the board presentation before 6. He pulled out a chair. "The narrative I want to lead with is straightforward. The campaign launched successfully, an external incident created a public relations challenge, and our team responded decisively within hours. Clean, confident, forward-facing." Claire's jaw tightened. "That narrative omits the semantic clearance report." Derek looked at her. "Yes," he said simply. "It does." "Derek." "Claire." His voice dropped into the specific register of a man ending a discussion he considers already finished. "The board does not need to know about an internal risk flag that was evaluated, considered, and resolved through normal leadership decision-making. That is standard operating procedure. We are not going to walk into that room tomorrow and manufacture a controversy where none needs to exist." The room went very still. I watched Claire's face, the precise, visible effort of a woman deciding whether to push back against 9 years of institutional authority at 3 in the morning after the worst night of her professional year. Her hands pressed flat against the table, her chin lifted, and then I spoke before she had to. "The semantic clearance report wasn't resolved through normal leadership decision-making," I said. "It was flagged by Claire 3 days before launch, elevated formally to you with 3 alternate hashtag options and a revised timeline, and dismissed in 7 words without documented justification." I held Derek's gaze without blinking. "That is not a resolved internal matter. That is a suppressed warning from a senior strategist whose recommendation directly predicted tonight's crisis." Derek turned to look at me with an expression that had gone from dismissive to very, very careful. "I'd be curious to know how you're familiar with that particular correspondence." "Because I pulled the server activity log during our crisis audit tonight," I said. "The email chain is timestamped, documented, and copied to a secure external location." I kept my voice level. "Under New York's Corporate Whistleblower Protection Statute, specifically Section 740 of the New York Labor Law, an employee who reports information to a supervisor about an activity that poses a substantial risk to the organization is legally protected from retaliation. The email chain documents exactly that." I leaned forward slightly. If it disappears before the 6 o'clock board meeting, that protection becomes significantly more complicated for Meridian's legal team to navigate. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Derek's expression did not crack. Men like Derek Shaw did not crack in conference rooms at 3 in the morning, but something shifted behind his eyes. A recalculation. The specific look of a man who had walked into a room expecting to manage a situation and discovered the situation had already been managed against him. "You've had a long night," he said, finally, his voice smooth and entirely controlled. "Both of you. I think we're all saying things with more heat than accuracy." "I'm not," I said. "Everything I just said is accurate and documented." Derek looked at Claire. "Is this how you want to handle it?" Claire met his eyes without hesitation. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than mine had been, but it was the specific quiet of someone who has made a decision they are not reversing. "The board should see the full picture," she said. "They're entitled to that." Something moved across Derek's face. Not anger, something colder. He stood, buttoned his coat with 2 sharp, precise movements, and looked between us one final time. "I'll see you both at 6, he said. "Get some rest." He walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Neither of us moved for a full 5 seconds. Then Claire turned to look at me, and her eyes were bright and wet and furious and something else entirely that I did not have a clean word for. "Marcus." Her voice broke on my name just slightly, just enough. "You didn't have to—" "He was going to bury it," I said. "He still might. Not without a fight." I stood up. "And not tonight." She pushed back from the table and stood too, and for a moment she just looked at me, chest rising and falling with something fast and uneven. Hands trembling at her sides, the full weight of the night finally visible on her face all at once. Then she crossed the 3 feet between us, wrapped both arms around me, and held on. Her forehead dropped against my shoulder. Her fingers gripped the back of my jacket like she was anchoring herself to something solid in a room that had stopped making sense. She was shaking finely all over the particular trembling of someone who has held it together past the point where holding it together was reasonable. My arms came up around her without a single moment of hesitation. "You're okay," I said against her hair. "You're okay." "I know," she said, muffled against my shoulder. "I just needed 30 seconds where I didn't have to be." "Take whatever you need," I said. She did. She pulled back after 30 seconds. Exactly 30, like she had counted. Her hands released my jacket and dropped to her sides. She stepped back 1 full pace, straightened her spine, and pushed a loose strand of hair away from her face with fingers that were still not entirely steady. Then she looked at me with an expression that was raw and embarrassed, and something else underneath that she was working very hard to keep contained. "I don't do that," she said. "For the record." "I know," I said. "I don't hug colleagues in conference rooms at 3 in the morning." "I know that too." "And I especially don't—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "I don't fall apart in front of people. I haven't done that in a very long time." "How long?" I asked. She looked at me sharply, like the question surprised her by being specific instead of politely vague. She crossed to the window and stood with her arms folded, looking out at the city. From this height, Manhattan looked clean and uncomplicated, all light and geometry, none of the mess visible from up here. 8 years, she said. I was 30, junior strategist at a firm in Boston. I had a campaign go sideways, nothing like tonight, smaller scale, and I cried in my supervisor's office. She paused. He was kind about it. And then 2 days later, he reassigned 3 of my accounts to a male colleague because he wasn't sure I could handle the pressure. Her voice was completely flat. He said it with genuine concern, like he was doing me a favor. My chest tightened. "Claire, I made a decision that day," she continued, and her voice had gone precise in the way it went precise when she was working through something she had thought about many times. "I decided that whatever I felt on my own time. Not at work, not in front of anyone who could use it against me." She turned from the window. "And for 8 years that decision served me extremely well." "Until tonight," I said. "Until tonight." She looked at me directly. "Until you." The words landed in the room and neither of us moved. "You don't have to apologize for being human," I said carefully. "Not to me, not ever." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not apologizing," she said. "I'm trying to explain why this is," she exhaled hard, "difficult. Why letting anyone see any of this is genuinely physically difficult for me." "I know it is," I said. I can see that it is, and I'm still here." She stared at me for a long moment. Something moved through her face, complicated and layered the expression of a woman rearranging a belief she had held for a very long time. "You are very inconvenient," she finally said. "I've been told," I said. That pulled a real laugh out of her, short and genuine and surprised, like it came up before she could decide whether to allow it. It transformed her face completely. For one unguarded second, she looked nothing like the VP of strategy who had intimidated every executive in Midtown Manhattan, and everything like a woman who had forgotten just briefly to be exhausted. I felt my heart do something I could not afford to examine closely. "We should pack up," she said. "Board meeting in less than 3 hours. I need to go home, shower, and change." She was already moving, closing laptops, stacking files, reassembling the professional armor piece by piece. But the movement was softer than usual, less performative, like she had stopped dressing for an audience. We rode the elevator down to the parking garage without speaking. The building was completely silent around us, that specific 4 a.m. silence of a structure that had forgotten anyone was still inside it. In the elevator, we stood side by side, shoulders close, and when the car jolted slightly between floors, her hand brushed mine on the railing. Neither of us moved away. The parking garage was cold and fluorescent and almost entirely empty. Our footsteps echoed. Claire's black Audi sat in her reserved spot near the far wall, and we walked toward it through the concrete quiet, and I was already calculating in my head whether she would be safe driving home alone at 4 a.m. on 3 hours of sleep and one of the most emotionally brutal nights of her recent life. She reached the car first, stopped, looked down. "You have got to be kidding me," she said. The rear driver's side tire was completely flat. Not slowly deflating fully, thoroughly, irreversibly flat, the wheel rim sitting almost flush against the concrete. She crouched down and pressed 2 fingers against the rubber and then stood back up and looked at the ceiling of the parking garage like she was asking it a specific personal question. "Okay," she said. "Okay, that's fine. I'll call." She pulled out her phone, checked the screen. "The 24-hour roadside service wait time is currently 90 minutes. 90 minutes, I repeated. Because there was apparently a concert that ended at midnight and half of Manhattan needs assistance simultaneously. She pressed one hand against the roof of her car and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. "I cannot stand in a parking garage for 90 minutes, Marcus. I have a board meeting at 6 o'clock. "You're not standing in a parking garage for 90 minutes, I said. "My car is on level 2. I'll drive you." She opened her eyes. "Your apartment is on the west side. My building is in Tribeca. That's completely out of your—" "Claire." I held her gaze. "Get your bag." She looked at me for a long moment. Then something in her shoulders released a small, visible surrender, and she reached into the car for her bag and her coat and straightened up and said, "I'm going to owe you significantly more than a thank you after tonight." "We'll figure it out," I said. My car was a 4-year-old dark blue Subaru that had never once been described as impressive and made absolutely no apologies for it. Claire folded into the passenger seat, dropped her bag at her feet, and pulled her coat tighter around herself while I started the engine. The GPS loaded the route to Tribeca. Estimated travel time 22 minutes. Then my weather alert fired. I looked at the notification. Read it twice. Felt something between disbelief and grim inevitability settle across my shoulders. A winter storm warning had been issued for all 5 boroughs at 3:47 a.m. Heavy snowfall beginning immediately. All major highways, including the I-278 corridor, the fastest route from Midtown to Tribeca, were already showing significant accumulation. Estimated road closure risk high. Claire leaned over and read the alert on my phone. "Well," she said, her voice entirely calm. "Of course." And outside the parking garage entrance, the first heavy snow of December had already begun to fall. The I-278 westbound was a parking lot. I had known it would be bad the moment we pulled out of the garage and the headlights hit the first wave of snow coming down hard and sideways off the Hudson. By the time we reached the on-ramp, the highway had already turned from a road into a long, slow river of red brake lights stretching out ahead of us as far as the snow let us see. The New York State Department of Transportation had deployed salt trucks, but they were losing badly. The accumulation was outpacing treatment, and every few hundred yards a car had simply stopped in place and given up. "I-278 is closing," Claire said, reading her phone. "NOAA just upgraded the warning. They're recommending all non-essential travel cease immediately." She looked up at the wall of stopped traffic ahead of us. I think we qualify as non-essential at this point. There's a Shell station about a quarter-mile ahead on the service road, I said. We can pull off and wait it out. How long? Storm system is moving fast. 45 minutes, maybe an hour. She pressed her head back against the seat and stared at the roof of the car. I am going to be extraordinarily late to my own board meeting. You're going to be alive for your own board meeting, I said. That's the better outcome. She turned her head and looked at me with an expression that was exhausted and genuinely amused at the same time. You have a remarkable talent for reframing terrible situations. Marketing background, I said. Everything is positioning. She laughed real and unguarded, and the sound filled the car and did something significant to my ability to concentrate on the road. The Shell station materialized out of the snow like a mirage, buzzing fluorescent canopy, one attendant visible through the window of the lit interior. 3 other cars already pulled into the lot with their hazards blinking orange through the white. I eased in beside them, killed the headlights, and left the engine running for heat. Outside, the snow came down in dense, wind-driven sheets. The highway beyond the lot had gone completely still, just a long, white silence where 40 minutes ago there had been a city. Okay, Claire said, pulling her coat tighter. We wait, I agreed. The heater was working, but the passenger side ran cold. It always had a minor mechanical grudge I had never gotten around to fixing. I noticed Claire curl her shoulders inward after about 90 seconds, pulling her coat lapels closer, and I reached into the back seat without thinking, grabbed my spare jacket, a heavy charcoal wool one I kept there through winter, and dropped it across her lap. She looked down at it, then up at me. Marcus, passenger side heater is broken, I said. Has been for 2 winters. And you haven't fixed it because I'm the only one who usually sits on this side of the car, I said. Take the jacket. She held my gaze for a beat, then pulled the jacket up over her shoulders without further argument. It was too big for her by a significant margin. The shoulders dropped halfway to her elbows. The hem fell past her hips, and she looked completely different wearing it. Smaller, less constructed, more real. Thank you, she said for the 4th time tonight. That's 4, I said. She blinked. What? 4 thank yous. Tonight, I'm keeping count. Her mouth curved. Is there a threshold where it becomes excessive? Not even close, I said. She shifted in her seat to face me more fully, tucking her feet up slightly, pulling my jacket tighter around her shoulders. Outside, a gust hit the car hard enough to rock it gently on its wheels. The snow on the windshield thickened into a solid white curtain that turned the lot beyond into shapes and light. Can I tell you something? She asked. Yes. When I was 26 and first starting out, she said, I had a supervisor who told me that the reason I was good at strategy was because I thought like a man. She paused. He meant it as a compliment. He was genuinely proud of himself for saying it. Her voice carried the specific flatness of someone describing an old wound that had long since scarred over, but still pulled sometimes in cold weather. And I smiled and said thank you, because I needed the job and I needed the reference and I needed every single thing he controlled access to. She looked at her hands in her lap. I spent the next 12 years making myself so undeniable that nobody would ever feel comfortable saying anything like that to me again. She looked up. And it worked. It worked completely. And the cost of it was, she exhaled. The cost of it was Ryan telling me I was too focused to love someone properly, and me being alone in a conference room at 2 a.m. fixing a disaster that wasn't my fault while the man who caused it slept comfortably at home. Her voice had not broken, but her eyes were bright and wet, and she was gripping the edge of my jacket at her collarbone with both hands in a way that made my chest ache. You are not too focused to love someone properly, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. She looked at me. You don't know that. I've watched you for 18 months, I said. I know exactly how much you care about the people around you. I've seen you stay late for junior staff. I've seen you fight for your team in rooms where nobody else was fighting. I held her gaze. The problem was never that you loved your work too much. The problem was that Ryan needed you smaller than you were. Her breath caught audible and sharp in the quiet of the car. Marcus, she whispered. Yeah, I said. She leaned sideways slowly, deliberately, and rested her head against my shoulder. Her whole body exhaled in one long release, the tension bleeding out of her all at once, the way it only does when someone finally reaches a place they feel safe enough to stop performing. I did not move. I stayed exactly as I was, present and still, and completely certain that whatever this was, whatever it was becoming, I was not going to be the one to break it. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside the car, it was warm and quiet and close. Then my phone lit up on the dashboard. Lauren Hartley, 4:38 a.m. I pressed accept. Her voice came through fast and tight, the voice of someone who had been awake all night and had just found something that changed everything. Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully. A breath. Derek Shaw just sent an email to 3 board members, 20 minutes ago. I have a copy. Her voice dropped. He's not going after the campaign. He's going after Claire. Claire lifted her head off my shoulder the instant she heard Lauren's voice. Read it to me, I said, word for word. Lauren's voice tightened. Subject line: concerns regarding crisis management judgment C. Donovan. Body reads, colleagues, given tonight's events, I feel obligated to share some concerns I have been carrying for several months regarding Claire's decision-making under pressure. The Solaris crisis reveals a pattern of strategic overconfidence that I believe warrants discussion before we enter a period of client rebuilding. I am available to speak privately before the 6 o'clock session. Derek. The car went completely quiet. Claire's face had gone absolutely still, the particular stillness of someone absorbing a hit they had been half expecting and still were not fully prepared for. Her hands gripped the edges of my jacket at her collarbone so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry and burning and furious. He's framing it as concern, she said. Her voice was low and precise and extremely dangerous. He's going to walk into that room and perform worry, and the 3 people who received that email are going to sit down already primed to see a woman who couldn't handle the pressure. Not if we get there first, I said. She looked at me. What? I was already pulling up the email chain on my phone, the 4-message documentation of Derek's suppressed warning. Lauren, I said, I need you to forward the semantic clearance email chain to the personal addresses of every board member, not their Meridian accounts personal. Do you have those? Crawford gave them to me 6 months ago for the emergency contact protocol, she said. Marcus, if I send this, send it, Claire said. Her voice had shifted sharp and certain, the voice she used when a decision had been made and the discussion was finished. Send it now, Lauren. Subject line: full context Solaris campaign risk documentation. No additional message, just the chain. A pause, the sound of Lauren typing fast. Sending. A breath. Done. Marcus, Claire, be careful walking in there. We will, I said. Get some sleep. I ended the call. Outside, the snow had begun to thin. The wind dropping the sheets, lightening to scattered flakes, drifting almost gently now through the fluorescent glow of the station canopy. The highway beyond the lot was starting to show movement again, the first salt trucks grinding through since the storm peaked. We can move, I said. Claire nodded. She did not take off my jacket. The drive to Meridian's building took 14 minutes through streets that were white and quiet and almost beautiful in the early morning gray. Neither of us talked about Derek or the board or the email chain. We had done everything we could do from a car in a snowstorm, and both of us knew it. What happened next would happen in that room at 6 o'clock, and not 1 second before. Instead, Claire said, Tell me something that has nothing to do with any of this. I thought for a moment. I have a dog-eared copy of East of Eden that I've started 4 times and never finished. She turned to look at me. Why not? Because every time I get to a certain point, I slow down on purpose, I said. Because I don't want it to be over. She was quiet for a moment. That's the saddest and most romantic thing I've heard all night. It's 5 in the morning, I said. The bar is on the floor. She laughed, warm and genuine, and leaned her head back against the seat and looked at me sideways with an expression that made it very difficult to keep my eyes on the road. I pulled up to Meridian's building at 5:22 a.m. The street was empty and white, and the lobby lights burned gold through the glass. I cut the engine. Neither of us moved immediately. Claire, I said. I know, she said. Whatever happens in that room. I know, Marcus. She turned to face me fully. Her eyes were tired and clear and completely certain. She reached across and took my hand, both of hers wrapping around mine, warm and deliberate, and held it the way someone holds something they are not ready to put down. "I need you to know something before we go in there." Her voice was quiet. "What you did tonight, what you chose, nobody has ever done that for me. Not once. In 12 years. Her throat moved. "I don't know what to do with that yet, but I needed you to know that I know." My chest felt like something had taken up permanent residence in it that had not been there yesterday. "We'll figure out what to do with it," I said. "After." She squeezed my hand once tight and certain, then let go, pushed open the door, and stepped out into the cold, white morning. I followed her inside. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor at 5:31 a.m. At the far end of the hall, through the glass wall of the main boardroom, I could already see Derek Shaw seated at the head of the table, coffee in hand, speaking to 2 board members who had arrived early. He looked up when we walked in. His expression did not change, but his coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. The boardroom held 7 people when we walked in at 5:58 a.m. Derek sat at the head of the table. 3 board members occupied the left side: Patricia Hale, General Counsel; Robert Finch, CFO, and James Whitmore, Chairman. Bill Crawford sat across from them, hands folded, jaw tight. A woman from Meridian's legal team sat in the corner with a notepad she had not yet opened. Every single person in that room had their phone face up on the table. Derek opened the meeting with the specific confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "I appreciate everyone making time at this hour," he said, smoothing his tie. "Given last night's events, I thought it was important that we aligned on a clear narrative before the day's communications begin. The Solaris situation was handled, the account is secured, and I believe we can frame this as a demonstration of Meridian's crisis capabilities." He paused. "However, I do think we owe ourselves an honest conversation about the judgment calls that contributed to our exposure." He looked directly at Claire when he said it. Patricia Hale looked up from her phone. "Derek," she said, "I received an email at 4:43 this morning, a full documentation chain regarding the Solaris #clearance process." She set her phone down. "Would you like to speak to that first before we discuss judgment calls?" The room temperature dropped several degrees. Derek's expression held. "That chain represents an internal risk discussion that was resolved through normal leadership. It represents a formal written warning," Robert Finch said, cutting cleanly across him, "sent by your VP of Strategy 72 hours before launch, recommending a delay with 3 documented alternatives which you dismissed in a 7-word reply." He removed his reading glasses. "That is not a resolved discussion, Derek. That is a paper trail." Derek's jaw tightened. His eyes moved to me fast and sharp, and I held his gaze without moving. Then Claire stood up. The room went completely still. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform anger or injury or vindication. She simply opened the presentation on the room's main screen, our version, the one we had built between midnight and 3 in the morning, and spoke with the specific clarity of someone who had been preparing for this moment for 3 days without knowing it. "The campaign launched with a flagged semantic risk," she said. "I identified it, documented it, escalated it formally, and was overruled. When the risk materialized last night, Marcus Webb and I stayed and contained the damage before it could cost this company its largest active account." She advanced the slide. "The account is secured. The public statement has been received positively. The 48-hour rebuild strategy is ready for client review." She looked around the table. "I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here to make sure the board has accurate information, because accurate information is the only thing that protects this company going forward." She sat down. James Whitmore, who had not spoken once, looked at Derek and said very quietly, "I'd like to recommend an independent internal review of the clearance process and this decision chain. I think we owe that to ourselves before this goes any further." He looked around the table. "Agreed." 4 hands went up. Derek's was not among them. "Agreed," Whitmore said. "We'll table the rest for 48 hours pending review." He closed his folder. "Thank you, Claire. Marcus." He looked at Derek. "Derek, I'd like 30 minutes with you after this." Derek said nothing. His coffee sat untouched in front of him, completely cold. The meeting broke at 6:24 a.m. People filed out with the controlled urgency of executives who had more to process than they were prepared to do publicly. Bill Crawford stopped beside Claire on his way out, gripped her shoulder once firmly, and said, "Well done," before walking on. I found her in the hallway outside the boardroom, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window with her back to the room, looking out at a city that had turned white and clean and quiet overnight. The snow had stopped. The early morning light was coming in low and pale gold off the Hudson, washing everything in something that looked almost gentle. I stopped beside her. She turned. Her eyes were wet, not from sadness, something else entirely, something that did not have a clean name, and she looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had been watching build across her face all night, layer by layer, until now there was nothing left underneath it but the thing itself. She reached out and took my hand, both of hers wrapping around mine the same way she had in the car, but different now. Steadier, more deliberate, like a decision being made in full daylight instead of in the dark. "How long have you known," I asked, "about how I feel?" She held my gaze. "Since the Morrison pitch, 8 months ago. You stayed 3 hours after everyone left and fixed my entire presentation without telling me." Her thumb moved slowly across my knuckles. "I've been watching ever since, waiting to see what kind of man you actually were." "And now you know," I said. "And now I know," she said. She looked down at our hands, then up at my face. "There's something I want to show you," she said quietly. "Come with me." She took me to the roof. Not the event space where we had been celebrating less than 8 hours ago, but the actual roof, the maintenance level accessible through a fire door at the end of the executive hallway that required a specific keycard and one final flight of concrete stairs. Claire had both. The door opened, and the cold hit us immediately, sharp and clean after the recycled air of the boardroom. The roof was completely white. Last night's snow still undisturbed, unmarked, except for a narrow path of footprints along the parapet wall that Claire clearly knew from memory. Manhattan spread out below us in every direction, just beginning to wake. The Hudson caught the early light and threw it back silver. A taxi cut a clean black line down 6th Avenue. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 7 times. "I come up here when I need to think," Claire said. She walked to the parapet and stood with both hands on the edge, looking out. "Nobody else knows about it. I've never brought anyone up here before." She glanced back at me. "Until now." I walked to stand beside her. Our shoulders touched. "Why me?" I asked. She considered the question the way she considered everything, not reaching for the easy answer, turning it over until she found the true one. "Because you're the only person who has ever made me feel like the version of myself I actually want to be," she said. "Not the version that survives. The version that lives." A gust came off the river and lifted her hair. She reached up to push it back, and her hand was cold when it brushed my jaw. She had not meant for it to land there, but she did not pull it back. She left it there. Her cold fingers deliberate against my face, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my chest ache in the best possible way. "I owe you an honest answer," she said quietly. "To what?" "To the question you haven't asked yet." Her thumb moved slightly against my jaw. "Whether any of this is real, or whether it's just an extraordinary night making ordinary feelings seem like something bigger." I reached up and covered her hand with mine, held it there against my face. "It's not the night," I said. "I felt this way 6 months before tonight. I'll feel it 6 months after." Her breath released slowly. "Me too," she said, her voice dropping to something rough and honest. "That's what scared me. And now—" She looked at me for a long moment. The pale gold morning light fell across her face, and she looked nothing like the woman who had intimidated every executive in this building, and everything like the woman she was when nobody was performing for anyone. Exhausted and brilliant and completely certain. "Now," she said, "I am done being scared of the things I actually want." She leaned forward and kissed me. It was not dramatic. It was not the kiss of two people swept away by something larger than themselves. It was the kiss of two people who had been moving toward each other for a very long time and had finally deliberately chosen to close the distance. Her free hand found the front of my jacket. My arms came around her. She was cold from the December air and warm underneath it, and she kissed me the way she did everything fully, without reservation, with her whole self committed to the decision she had made. When we pulled apart, her forehead came to rest against mine. Her eyes stayed closed. Her breath came out in a small white cloud between us in the cold morning air. "That was worth the wait," she whispered. 8 months, I said. "At least," she said. I held her on that white roof with the city waking up below us and understood something I had not had language for before this moment. The night had not created what existed between us. It had simply removed everything we had been using to pretend it was not there. That is what I want to leave you with. People get love wrong because they expect it to arrive in a single moment. A grand confession, a kiss in the rain, a dramatic gesture that makes everything suddenly clear. But it does not work that way. It builds through 100 small choices you barely notice yourself making. Staying when you could leave. Speaking when silence is safer. Choosing someone else's well-being over your own convenience again and again without keeping score. Claire chose me the night she decided to trust me. I chose her the night I stayed when the work was done. Everything that followed was simply us being honest about a choice we had already made long before either of us said a word. If you have ever held back from someone for reasons that felt careful and responsible and correct, I understand that completely. But I want to ask you one honest question. What has the caution cost you? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. I will see you in the next one.